The screen door always made that unmistakable slam as you ran barefoot into the summer air. Nobody cared if your feet were dirty. You just bolted out into the sunshine, ready for bikes, sprinklers, and scraped knees that stung for a second but felt like freedom for hours. Parents didn't schedule your day. They just told you to go outside and not come back until dinner. You made your own fun. You got thirsty, you drank from the hose. Hungry, you asked a neighbor for half a sandwich. It was unsupervised magic from dawn to dusk. You walked to school, alone, through crunchy leaves, icy puddles, or blazing heat, and no one worried. No phones, no GPS, no helmets, just you, your lunch pail, and the world feeling bigger than it actually was. Somehow, you always made it on time. Reading Dick and Jane books out loud felt like a rite of passage. "See Spot run," the teacher would say, and 30 tiny voices followed. It didn't matter if you stumbled or read slow. You were learning one simple sentence at a time, together. The school bus had cracked vinyl seats, no seat belts, and windows that stuck halfway down. It smelled like rubber and peanut butter. If it was hot, you stuck to the seat. If it was cold, you scraped your initials into the fogged glass with a mittened finger. Cold milk came in thick glass bottles with paper caps you peeled open. It made a little pop when the seal broke. You didn't sip it. You gulped it. And somehow it tasted colder, creamier, and more real than anything in a carton today. After a full day of play, you'd fall asleep to the soft hum of a box fan in the window. No white noise machines, no sleep apps, just the fan, a light breeze, and the deep satisfaction of having worn yourself out the old-fashioned way. You crouched on the sidewalk and rolled marbles with serious focus. Everyone had a lucky shooter, bigger, heavier, maybe swirled with glitter. Sometimes you lost it in a game, and yeah, you cried a little. But the real fun was in the clack of glass and the bragging rights. Baseball cards weren't stored in protective cases. They were treasures one minute and bike-spoke noisemakers the next. The sound of your wheels humming with Mickey Mantle or Yogi Berra cards fluttering in the spokes was the soundtrack of every neighborhood race down the block. After school, you plopped down with a snack and turned on the Mickey Mouse Club. You knew the Mouseketeers by name, and when the big Mickey ears came on screen, the world stopped. That theme song still plays in your head like it never left. Sitting cross-legged during school assemblies, your knees itched under stiff wool slacks or a scratchy dress. The floor was cold. The announcements were boring, but you still remember how it smelled, like chalk dust, linoleum, and the strange echo of 400 fidgety kids all trying to sit still. Real chalkboards meant real erasers, and real erasers meant white clouds every time someone tried to clean the board. It was an actual job. Someone got picked to erase it after class. That smell of dust and wood still hits you in random moments. You played outside until the streetlights came on, and that was your curfew. Stickball, hopscotch, tag, whatever you could invent. Your hands were scraped, your socks were dirty, and your elbows probably had a Band-Aid. But you'd never had so much fun in your life. A fresh bar of pink Camay soap meant someone had just cleaned the bathroom. You sniffed it, maybe even rubbed it on your wrist like perfume. It was smooth, slightly slippery, and somehow always smelled like something fancy, something grown up. Learning cursive wasn't just about writing, it was about growing up. You practiced loops and slants on lined paper, and the teacher circled every mistake in red. Getting it right felt like unlocking a secret adult language, and it sure beat printing. You held your nose and took a bite because that's what you were told. Canned spinach, overcooked peas, gray meatloaf. It didn't matter. You cleaned your plate. No complaints. That was the rule. And if you didn't, well, cold liver showed up again the next morning. The monkey bars were made of steel, and the ground was gravel, but you climbed anyway. You'd hang upside down until your head throbbed or swing across like a trapeze artist. If you fell, you got up, maybe cried, but you went right back up again. You begged for a nickel to buy bazooka bubble gum. It was hard as a rock at first, but once it softened, the bubbles were legendary. And the little comic folded inside, you always read it, even if you'd seen it 100 times before. Soapbox derby cars didn't come from stores. They came from weekends in the garage. You hammered and painted with your dad, arguing over wheels and laughing at wobbly test runs. When race day came, you didn't care if you won. It already felt like victory. Climbing trees wasn't just about height. It was about perspective. Up there, you could see the whole block, maybe a neighbor's backyard you'd never noticed. You felt older, braver, more free. And if your pants tore, you just climbed down fast and hoped Mom didn't see. Birthday parties meant crepe paper hats, red punch in Dixie cups, and maybe a store-bought cake, if you were lucky. You played pin the tail on the donkey, won a cheap prize, and took home a little paper bag of candy. It was perfect. Saddle shoes looked great in pictures, but in real life, they pinched, and they took forever to polish. White polish for the base, black polish for the saddle. But you wore them anyway, because that's what everyone wore. And they did go with everything. You'd sprawl out on your belly and turn the dial on the radio, waiting for the Lone Ranger. The theme came on, and suddenly you were in the Wild West. The sound effects alone could put you right in the saddle, reins in hand. Cartoons came in black and white, and they didn't need color to be funny. You squinted at a tiny TV with rabbit ears and watched Popeye, Betty Boop, or Bugs Bunny. If the picture rolled, you smacked the side. And somehow it always came back. Hand-me-downs weren't negotiable. You wore whatever your older sibling grew out of. Too short? Roll the cuffs? Too loose? Add a belt? It didn't matter. Clothes were meant to last, and sometimes they lasted long enough to show up in family photos twice. Your first real haircut felt like a rite of passage. For boys, it was the crisp buzz of a crew cut. For girls, maybe a pixie trim that Mom said looked grown up. The corner barber or beauty shop smelled like talc, hairspray, and aftershave, and you always left itchy. Every kid had a piggy bank. Ceramic, metal, plastic. Didn't matter. You dropped pennies in one by one, hoping it would someday buy something big. But it never filled. You'd shake it, listen to the coins clink, then promise yourself not to open it. And probably did anyway. Making a slingshot felt like building a secret weapon. You found the perfect Y-shaped branch, smuggled a rubber band from the junk drawer, and practiced in the backyard until you could knock over a can. Your aim was terrible, but you still felt like Tom Sawyer with every shot. Appliance boxes were treasure. When a new fridge or stove arrived, the box didn't get thrown out. It became your fort, spaceship, secret club, or Wild West jail. You cut windows, drew on it with crayons, and crawled inside for hours, believing cardboard really could be a castle. Popsicle sticks, white glue, and way too much imagination. That's how masterpieces were made. You'd build pencil holders, picture frames, or weird towers that collapsed before they dried. Elmer's glue peeled off your fingers in satisfying layers, and the finished craft always got proudly stuck on the fridge. Secret notes were a classroom currency, folded into neat little triangles passed under desks, filled with scribbled crushes or jokes. Do you like me? Yes or no? It was thrilling, risky, and half the time the teacher caught you. But somehow, that just made it better. You played jacks on the kitchen floor, bouncing the red ball just right and trying to sweep up as many metal stars as possible before it came down. The linoleum was cold under your legs, and the sound of clinking jacks was somehow louder than it should have been. Milk money came in an envelope with your name written in careful pencil. You handed it to your teacher like it was a bank deposit. That little bottle of milk at snack time wasn't just a drink, it was part of the daily ritual. And it was always cold. Grass stains were permanent. You'd slide down a hill or roll in the backyard, and those green smears showed up like badges of honor. Mom scrubbed with soap bars and muttered under their breath, but no one really got mad. A well-earned stain meant you'd had a good day. The red radio flyer wagon was more than a toy. It was a vehicle, a ride, a status symbol. You took turns riding in it, being pulled fast until it tipped, or hauling a sibling around like you were driving a parade float. The wheels squeaked, the joy didn't. Fireflies came out just as the sky turned blue-gray. You'd chase them barefoot through the yard, cupping them in your hands like tiny living light bulbs. Sometimes you'd catch a bunch in a jar with holes in the lid. Then you'd let them go, like magic being released. On the hottest summer nights, you dragged your pillow and a sheet to the screened-in porch. The air was still and thick, but it beat the stuffy bedroom. You fell asleep to crickets and the distant hum of passing cars, feeling like the whole world had quieted just for you. Dinner wasn't announced. It was declared. Sometimes with a bell, sometimes just with Mom's voice carrying across the neighborhood. Time to eat, and no matter what you were doing, you dropped it and ran. Because when Mom called for dinner, you didn't negotiate. You showed up. Lunch trades were serious business. You'd open your brown bag, eye the contents, and immediately start negotiations. Peanut butter for bologna? Cookie for chips? But somehow, no one wanted the apple. It always went back in the bag. A bruised, ignored peace offering from your mother. The sound of the good humor truck coming down the street made you drop everything. That jingle was a siren call. You scrambled for coins, screamed for Mom, and ran barefoot to the curb. Fudgicles, creamsicles, and ice cream sandwiches, all perfectly cold and completely unforgettable. Every classroom had that one teacher with a wooden pointer and a glare that could silence a room. The pointer tapped the blackboard like a metronome. Sometimes it smacked a desk to make a point. No one talked back. You learned fast, and you remembered every lesson. Your lunchbox wasn't just a container. It was a statement. Maybe it had Roy Rogers or Howdy Doody on it, with a matching thermos that always smelled a little like tomato soup. The metal clinked when you opened it. And heaven help you if you forgot it on the bus. Recess was loud, chaotic, and sacred. You played Red Rover, Duck Duck Goose, or just ran in circles for no reason at all. Kids scraped knees, got grass in their hair, and yelled until they were hoarse. And when the bell rang, you groaned, but lined up anyway. Getting your mouth washed out with soap wasn't a myth. Say the wrong word, and next thing you knew, Mom had that bar of ivory at the ready. It was swift justice, tasted like chemicals, and stayed with you the rest of the day. Lesson learned, most of the time. Lemonade stands popped up on every street when the weather warmed. You scribbled a sign, grabbed a pitcher, and hoped for traffic. The lemonade was warm, the cups flimsy, and the change sticky with quarters. But every nickel felt like success. You were a business tycoon for an afternoon. When the picture on the TV went fuzzy, you didn't complain. You adjusted the rabbit ears. Maybe Dad smacked the side. Maybe you held the antenna while balancing on one foot. Eventually, the snow cleared just enough to see Ed Sullivan. And that was good enough. Tin can telephones weren't toys. They were experiments. You punched a hole, tied the string tight, and stretched it as far as it could go. If you and your friend stayed still and quiet, you could hear the faintest whisper. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like science. Valentine's Day meant shoe boxes turned into mailboxes covered in red paper and doilies. You made one at school and hoped it filled up. The best cards were funny. The worst were from the teacher. But even the weird ones with ducks and puns felt like little victories. Counting down to Christmas started early. You made paper chains, red, green, sometimes glittered, and hung them up in the living room. Every night you tore one off with anticipation. It made December feel magical, like time itself was wrapped in construction paper and Scotch tape. Lining up for polio shots at school was nerve-wracking. You stood shoulder to shoulder with classmates, inching forward as the nurse got closer. The needle looked huge. Some kids cried. Others tried not to. But your parents said it was important. So you took a deep breath and did it. Orange juice came from a frozen cylinder, not a bottle or box. You had to run hot water over the can to get it loose, then mix it in a pitcher with 3 cans of water. It never tasted quite like fresh juice, but somehow it was perfect anyway. You'd find a good stick, maybe whittle it a little and turn it into a sailboat with scrap paper or leaves. Then you'd race them down the gutter after a rainstorm, chasing them in bare feet and hoping yours didn't get stuck in a pile of leaves or vanish down the drain. On quiet afternoons, you'd just lie in the grass, hands behind your head, and stare at the sky. The clouds drifted slowly, changing shape with every breeze. That one's a dog. No, it's a train. There were no prizes, just wonder. It was boredom in the best possible form. You didn't just know your neighbors. You knew their kids, their dogs, their favorite pie. You borrowed sugar without a second thought, helped shovel their sidewalk, and waved every time they passed. There were porch chats, block parties, and unspoken agreements. Everyone looked out for everyone else. You'd strap on a cowboy hat, grab a toy gun with caps, and gallop around the yard like you were in a western. Sometimes you were the sheriff, sometimes the outlaw. Nobody cared about historical accuracy. It was all about the noise, the dust, and the pretend standoff at high noon. Your Sunday best was one outfit, stiff, starched, and always itchy. Girls had scratchy dresses with crinoline. Boys wore button-down shirts and clip-on ties. It didn't matter if it fit right or if you liked it. On Sundays, you looked sharp. At least for as long as you could stand it. The first time you heard Elvis, it felt like something electric. You didn't know why your heart beat faster, but it did. You couldn't stop humming it. But Mom said he wiggled his hips too much, so you kept it quiet, humming under your breath like it was a secret. Church was a weekly test of willpower. You sat stiffly in the pew, legs sticking to polished wood, and tried not to wiggle. Your shoes were tight, your collar scratchy. The sermon stretched forever, but afterward came cookies and lemonade in the basement, and that made it all worth it. Dad manned the grill with a spatula in one hand and a cold drink in the other. Mom brought out the potato salad in a big glass bowl. You ran barefoot in the grass while smoke curled into the summer air. That was dinner, simple, smoky, and perfect. Chores weren't optional. You mowed with a heavy reel mower, swept the porch, or helped hang laundry on the line. Sometimes you complained, but deep down you liked feeling useful. And if you did it without being asked, sometimes there was a root beer float in your future. The drugstore wasn't just for medicine. It had a soda fountain, stools that spun, and a kid behind the counter who knew how to pour a cherry Coke just right. You'd sit up tall, sip through a striped straw, and feel like you were part of something special and grown up. Drive-in movies were events. You piled into the back seat with pillows and blankets, munched on popcorn from a greasy paper bag, and watched the giant glowing screen under the stars. Half the time, you fell asleep before the second feature, but you always remembered being there. Lincoln Logs, Tinker Toys, and Erector-Sets weren't just toys. They were blueprints for imaginary skyscrapers, rocket ships, and frontier cabins. You'd spend hours figuring out how to fit the pieces just right. Sometimes the whole structure collapsed, and sometimes it actually stood long enough to show Dad. The Viewmaster felt like magic. You clicked through circular slides and saw the Grand Canyon, wild animals, or cartoon characters in 3D. You'd sit by the window and slowly flip through each image, pretending you were off on some great adventure, all without leaving the living room carpet. TV dinners were a big deal. You pulled back the foil, waited forever for them to heat, and ate them on a TV tray in front of your favorite show. The mashed potatoes were lumpy, the peas rubbery, but that little brownie in the corner made it all worth it. Highlights magazine lived in every waiting room, dentist, doctor, even the barber shop. You flipped straight to Goofus and Gallant, then circled every hidden object you could find. It smelled like paper and disinfectant and helped pass the time when your mom said, "Just a few more minutes." The Slinky never worked quite like the commercials promised, but that didn't stop you from trying. You'd balance it on the top stair, give it a nudge, and watch it flip its way down. Sometimes it tangled, sometimes it soared. Either way, it was hypnotic, and it always came back out. Playground games ruled recess. You played Simon Says or freeze tag until the bell rang. Everyone knew the rules, and if they didn't, you made them up. The only equipment was your imagination and maybe a patch of grass. But that was all you needed. Captain Kangaroo came on before school and made everything feel gentle. There was music, puppets, and a host who spoke slowly, like he actually cared if you were listening. You'd sit close to the screen, still half asleep, cereal in hand, starting your day with softness before the chaos of class. The shoe store had a strange contraption, a big metal machine that measured your feet. You stood perfectly still while the clerk adjusted the sliders, announcing your size like it was top-secret information. Then you tried on a pair and walked in circles while your mom pressed the toe. Heartbreak came in handwritten form. Maybe it was a folded note in your desk or a quiet word in the hallway. I like someone else. You acted like you didn't care, but you did. You kept the note anyway, tucked into a drawer, like some bittersweet badge of growing up. Mom's ironing board seemed like a permanent fixture. She'd press Dad's shirts with military precision, spritzing them from a glass bottle with a metal pump. The smell of starch hung in the air, and the hiss of steam felt warm and comforting. It was chore, art, and ritual all at once. Tracking dirt into the house earned you a sharp look, maybe even a smack with a dish towel. You wiped your shoes half-heartedly or forgot altogether. Mom sighed, pointed at the broom, and you swept without question. The lesson was simple: respect the floors or learn to clean them. At night, when the lights were off, the shadows came alive. You'd twist your hands into shapes and cast them onto the wall. Dogs, birds, monsters. Your little brother guessed, laughed, and made his own. It was quiet, silly, and better than any toy. Just you, the dark, and imagination. The icebox made a soft hum that ran through the whole house. When it clicked on or off, you noticed. You knew what food was where without looking. The cold glass bottles, the meat wrapped in butcher paper. And sometimes you just opened it to stand in the cool glow. Mom or Dad leaned in, kissed your forehead, and pulled the blanket up just right. Maybe there was a nightlight, maybe just the hallway glow, but you felt safe, tucked in with a full belly, sleepy eyes, and not a single thought about tomorrow. That kind of peace is rare now. You practiced with your yo-yo until you could walk the dog, rock the cradle, and maybe even around the world. It took patience, scraped knuckles, and a string that never stayed the right length, But once you got it, you showed off to anyone who'd watch, even the dog. Your name was scrawled in every book, toy, and crayon box you owned, in blue ballpoint pen, slightly slanted. It was a way to say, "This is mine," and if it faded or got smudged, you rewrote it, because every kid back then had a little pride in ownership. Sewing a button wasn't just a skill, it was expected. You learned it early, threading the needle with squinty eyes, knotting the end like Grandma showed you. When Dad's shirt lost a button, you offered to fix it. And when you did, he wore it like nothing had happened. Model airplanes came in flat cardboard boxes, smelled like glue and paint, and took hours of focus. You'd carefully punch out the plastic parts, follow the tiny instructions, and glue everything into place with trembling hands. Sometimes they flew, sometimes they didn't. But everyone felt like an achievement. Comic books were contraband after bedtime. You'd hide under the covers with a flashlight, flipping through pages of Batman, Superman, or Archie. The pages smelled like ink and excitement. You read every panel slowly, not wanting it to end. Sometimes you got caught, but usually you just kept reading. Every morning started the same. The flag went up, and you stood at attention with your classmate's hand on your heart. No one fidgeted, no one slouched. The anthem or the pledge played through a crackly speaker. It felt important, even if you didn't quite understand why. You said the Pledge of Allegiance with your hand on your chest, eyes on the flag. You knew every word by heart. You didn't question it. It was just how the day began. Your voice joined 30 others in a room full of desks and chalkboards and American dreams. Art class was a swirl of paste, clay, and color, and somehow always ended with you making an ashtray. Not because you smoked, but because your parents did. Lumpy, crooked, and full of fingerprints, it still got a proud spot on the coffee table. "I made that," you'd say. The basement became a classroom, a house, or sometimes a spaceship, depending on the game. You'd line up chairs for desks, boss around your little brother as the teacher, or cook pretend meals with plastic food. No screens, no electronics, just imagination, giggles, and the sound of running feet. A patch of dirt could become a 4-lane highway. You knelt down, pushed your favorite metal cars along the grooves you made with your fingers, and made engine noises under your breath. There were crashes, rescues, and races. And when the wind picked up, your town turned to dust. You'd spend hours perfecting your paper airplane, folded from notebook paper, tested over and over, nose reinforced with tape. You threw it down hallways, off porches, even from tree branches, chasing that perfect glide. If it crash-landed, no problem. You just folded another, swearing this one would break the record. The corner drugstore had stools that spun syrupy root beer and that big silver fountain machine. You'd plunk down your change, ask for a float, and watch the scoop sink into the fizz. The first sip was heaven. Cold, sweet, and creamy, like summer in a glass. You didn't need store-bought toys. A stick became a sword, a rock was a treasure, bottle caps turned into armies. Games had no names and no rules, just fun made up on the spot. Your imagination did the heavy lifting, and somehow Those games lasted all afternoon. The phone hung on the wall and had a real dial, round, heavy, and satisfying to spin. Everyone knew each other's numbers by heart. You answered with, "Hello?" and maybe a joke. No caller ID, no texting, just voices, chords that tangled, and waiting your turn to talk. A single bathroom meant strategy. Someone was always brushing their teeth, fixing their hair, or banging on the door. You waited your turn, grumbled about it, and learned patience. It was a tiny room with a big schedule. And somehow, the whole house ran on it. When storms rolled in, you lay on the floor by the radio and listened. The thunder cracked, the rain hit the roof, and the announcer gave updates like it was a big event. There was something safe about it. You didn't watch. You listened. And it made the storm feel cozy. Dandelions were currency. You'd run up to your mom, fist clenched with yellow fluff, and beam as you handed them over like a bouquet of roses. She'd say, "They're beautiful," and put them in a glass of water. And for a few days, weeds became something magical. $1 went far at the corner store. You walked there on your own, picked out a comic, maybe a soda, and a little bag of candy. The clerk knew your name. You paid in change and walked home slow, not because it was far, but because you didn't want the moment to end. Little golden books were dog-eared, scuffed, and loved to pieces. You read them over and over, the Pokey Little Puppy, Scuffy the Tugboat, until you knew the words by heart. The golden spines shone on the shelf like trophies. And even after you could read chapter books, you kept them anyway. Holidays meant the kids' table, folding chairs, plastic cups, and plates that bent when you cut your turkey. But it was your kingdom. You made jokes, snuck extra dessert, and passed secret notes. Grown-up conversation was boring anyway. At the kids' table, the real fun happened. Your first bike was freedom on 2 wheels. Maybe it was red. Maybe it had training wheels at first. But the second you rode it solo, the world got bigger. You could go to the park, the store, or just ride in circles. You didn't need a reason. Just whined. Old war movies played on TV, black and white, with dramatic music and brave heroes. You'd sit cross-legged on the floor, then run outside to reenact the battle. You dug trenches, yelled commands, and always won. It wasn't about violence. It was about being brave, like the guys on screen. The toy box creaked when you opened it. Inside were trucks, dolls, blocks, and toys passed down from older siblings. The hinges squealed, the lid slammed shut if you weren't careful, and the smell was a mix of plastic, wood, and time. It wasn't just storage, it was adventure waiting. Holding hands in class wasn't a big deal until it was. You reached across the desk, fingers brushed, and suddenly the whole room noticed. Giggles, blushing, maybe a note passed later. It wasn't love, not really. But it felt like the beginning of something, and that was enough.